Okay, so this is a bit of a new piece of content that we're trying. It's going to be a bit more stream of consciousness discussion style rather than a scripted video. We have here myself, Jesse, Vice President of SFUAMB. We have Jeridan. Jeridan has a fancy title that he's going to tell us right now.
I am just a friend and advocate of the SFUAMB. And here is Phil Johnston.
Hello, everybody. I'm the organizer for the Western branch of CAFE, and I help out with the SFUAMB. Hi.
I guess we'll just refer to you as the Jeridan for now. So today we spent a few hours in the early morning, around 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., just walking around downtown Vancouver, asking people a few questions about men's and women's issues. We framed it as kind of a, how do you feel about women's groups in society and how they're addressing women's issues, and then asked them the same question about men. And we found we interviewed maybe between 15 and 20 people over the course of that time. Yeah, between me and Theron during the interviewing. Yeah, for sure. What's up?
I just wanted to know, what was the most striking part of the day for you?
Oh, it was definitely the drunk guy who went on a 10-minute tirade about how Trump is the best candidate, and Quebec is awful. But the thing about him, I have to say, he was by far the most knowledgeable person about men's issues. He had all the stats. He put us to shame in terms of statistics. So that it was interesting. At first, he thought that we were like hardline feminists because of the way we had asked the question. So he was a bit hostile. But when it came out that we were, advocating for reduction in male suicide, fathers' rights, reduced male domestic violence, he was, a lot more amicable and very, very friendly.
How about you, Phil? What did you think was the most? What was the kind of feel for the day for you? What was the general feeling?
Really positive. I had a good time filming, and I think one of the things that struck me, and it strikes me more and more that I do this advocacy work, talking with the public or engaging with the public on men's issues, is that people are more friendly to this stuff than I expect. A lot of people didn't know much about men's issues, but didn't react negatively to the idea that men could use support or that their issues or problems are just as significant as women. So that felt good. It was really nice.
There was a bit of a theme of people saying, especially men saying, "Oh no, I don't know anything about men's issues," and then they would go on to describe issues that they'd faced, and you're a guy, you're facing issues because of your gender. That's the definition. But I think that's just there's obviously some other component in their heads of what a man's issue is, so they don't identify the issues they face as a man as a men's issue, which is it's interesting. I'd like to talk about more why you guys think that might be the case if that sounds like a good conversation topic.
Why people might not see a male issue as an issue at all? Like it's just sort of
why they don't see that they see themselves as a male, but they don't realize that those issues could be systemically affecting men. They kind of think of it as their own personal issue. Like, this is what I face. Whereas it's kind of, I guess it's individual versus collective, right? Maybe their group identity as a man isn't that strong or something.
You want to take a swing at that?
I mean, the first thing that struck me is it just the fear of being found outside that man box, about admitting to have any weaknesses or like that's the first thing that pops to mind. Maybe for most men is because I feel like to identify or to acknowledge one has an issue, I think that's difficult for most human beings. I think most human beings want to be viewed and perceived as healthy and good and likable and all of that. But I think there's something there for men is to admit you have an issue. I think is to admit that you could be in some way flawed as a man, or that your masculinity is somehow compromised.
Yeah.
Oh, just from my own experience, it's kind of like I don't really feel the need to explicate or explore any of that kind of content because I never feel that any kind of systemic abuse is happening my way because I'm a man. I'm just supposed to take it. Why would I bother complaining about something if I can handle it? It's like, no problem. I don't need to discover anything new about my masculinity or perhaps society's views upon what a man ought to be.
Yeah, well, I mean, in your life coaching, have you ever dealt with that? I mean, I'm sure that some of the guys that come talk to you talk about issues they've faced, maybe not on like a deep level, but kind of like I'm having trouble doing this or making this change in my life. I mean, that's an issue that they're bringing up.
For sure, just kind of what Phil was saying. People don't want to be viewed as something, or like I'm fine. I don't need to see anybody. I don't need to talk to anybody. There's no reason for me to consult anybody else about my feelings. And so that's a lot of times to get somebody in that sort of conversational talking mode, you do have to ask them certain questions that get So it is kind of like coaxing somebody out of their shell a little bit more. And men especially, because they don't like we were all saying, we don't want to be viewed as anything that's something that's incapable. Men have this definite sort of like societal fear or pressure to look incapable, to look like we can't do something. That's a huge deal. So
I mean, the cost benefit ratio for men is much smaller. I mean, like, say you're at work. And as a woman, you had a hard day and you cry. Well, people will come and comfort you probably. I mean, if you have a jackass of a boss, they might get mad. But in general, people will be like, "Oh, wow, are you okay? Do you need some help?" I mean, if you as a guy do that, like, people may do the same thing, but they're going to be looking at you a bit different after that. They're going to be wondering, is Johnson? Can he really cut it? If stuff gets hard, I totally did not mean Johnson as your name. That's just the first name that popped into my head. Jackson. Ken Jackson. We're not naming anyone here. But yeah, I think there's for a guy, getting your issue dealt with would be the benefit, but the cost is people seeing you as weak, and I think it's much more higher. Like the issue has to get a lot worse before it starts to really look like a good idea to talk about it. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why depression for men, they're more likely to complete on the first attempt at suicide, because it's gotten so bad that they maybe choose something they know will work, right? And I don't know. I'm not a mental health expert. That's completely out of my ass. But what isn't is that 80% of completed suicides are male. So
given that you guys are kind of saying the climate of the people that you talked to today was kind of positive, why do we have to do this at all if everybody seems so amicable to the idea?
Right. Well, I've been thinking a bit about this. I have I'll take a stab at an answer here. But, I mean, it kind of goes back to, I don't know if it'd be referencing, like, biology, but, it's that idea that it's always been in humanity's best interest to be paying close attention to the well-being of women, like the reproductive class, because it's like our ability to repopulate is really important for our survival. So I guess why I think there's vigilance needed in this area, even if it may seem like there's a general level of awareness amongst the population about men's issues, is that I think we naturally just don't look there. We're always naturally thinking about and caring about what is negatively affecting women, which is really good. It's served us really well. But I think in that way, we can just turn a real blind eye to what's happening to men, and particularly boys today. That's my, yeah.
So just given this sort of societal blind spot, what might we fill that with when we look in that direction?
To fill what exact blind spot, or?
Yeah, like what would you say? Like what kind of activities? Or
I think one of the things that's important is that we let men have men-only spaces. It's something that's really kind of overlooked. But if you've ever been with a group of guys, if you're a guy and a girl walks in, there's a pretty instantaneous change in the tone of the room. I mean, even if none of you are interested romantically or sexually in the girl, there's still an element of competition, right? You try to outman each other, and immediately the emotions go away, because what's useful in the Bronze Age mentality for a man is the guy who can't hunt mammoth because he's sad is the guy that dies, right? And it doesn't feed his kids. So the guy who can turn that off, then that is an evolutionary adaptation. It's beneficial, right? It doesn't really work now, but I mean we're in terms of evolutionary time, we're 2 steps out of the caves. It's not really as far back as we like to pretend.
You got something to say, or?
I was just when you made that remark about a woman walks by a group of men, like I don't know, is it bad that dynamic, like the dynamic changes? Like I think it's just that's the way it is. Like I feel like I could hear critics say, that's where men need to view women differently or need to sort of change their attitudes, but
Ignore the jump cut. I think it's useful to be aware of these, behaviors that aren't really useful. But just because we're aware of them doesn't mean we can, get rid of them like that. If we could have done that, then we wouldn't. The murder wouldn't be a problem anymore. We would have solved all these things if we could just turn behaviors on and off. I think the best we can do is be aware of them, and try and be kind of conscious of them in how they influence what we do and the way we act. Because otherwise we'll be ruled by them. But we can't just call them evil and say they're bad, because they exist for a reason, and they're sometimes beyond our control. So vilifying them does no one any good. It doesn't help.
I just want to ask a question. So, I mean, obviously, it's clear men are struggling today with, feeling their emotions, expressing their emotions, as evidenced by the high level of suicide rates among men. So I'm just thinking about stoicism. Like, does that, incorporating that, like taking that into consideration, does stoicism still have a bad rap? Because I feel like, isn't it really about, having control, like exerting control over your emotions, and rather than like not being aware of them? So I don't know. I've just heard some people talk about stoicism as like it's a problem. Like men need to not be so stoic. When
could you define stoicism?
Well, okay. So my understanding of stoicism is a practice of not being overpowered by one's emotions, but keeping them in check, having awareness of what you feel, but not acting on that. But
well, I mean, the thing I'd have to say for that is that like it's kind of hard to tell, right? Because like, if you're stoic and it works, right, and you deal with your depression or whatever, and you don't self-harm, no one knows, right? It doesn't get out there. They don't never know how close you came, right? So that's the thing, is that it's hard to evaluate the effectiveness of it because we only see the failures, right? We only hear about the guy who didn't talk to anyone and then killed himself. We don't hear about the guy who, didn't talk to anyone, spent some time alone, thought about his life, reevaluated it, controlled his emotions, and got out of his depression. And again, I'm not a clinical psychologist. Maybe I'm talking shit. I don't know if you can work your way out of a depression, but I think what I'm trying to say is pretty clear. Like, you don't see the successes of that model. I think it's just important that the option to talk about your emotions be presented, but not forced, because there are definitely men who just don't do that. That's just, they feel no desire to really be open.
Just on the topic of, like you're saying, like you only see the failures, not the successes. And I think at the same time that you got to look at that opposite side of the coin, because I find that a lot of men who are maybe displaying a sense of stoicism are kind of lithe in the way that they speak. It's like, it doesn't make me want to talk to them. It kind of makes me feel like here's a human being who I can't really be playful with, maybe, or who just doesn't really seem to understand how to be social.
Yeah, I just wanted to say why I think I brought it up is because sometimes I see men who would be described as stoic, and they're pointed at, and people say, well, those men need to get in touch with their emotions, they need to be more expressive, or it goes back to something we talked about earlier, that men need to be more like women. So stoicism is a problem, but I think there are a lot of men that do feel deeply, but they find a way of expressing those feelings that may not look like the full-on expression of that emotion. They may create something that embodies what they feel. So I just think that sometimes there's a bias against men who maybe don't express their feelings so clearly when they might be completely functional and fine.
I think it's really hard to. It's a dangerous path to go down to start saying people ought to do this, ought to do that, right? Like, because I think the only thing people ought to do is what they will, as long as they harm no others. Like, if you want to show your emotions, go do that. If you don't. Just be aware that the option is open, and it shouldn't be dimming. And when we say that men are told to act more like women, we kind of have to be a little bit careful about that, because we're what being a woman is also kind of open to interpretation. That, like, we have like a classical idea of like the emotional. But there's different stereotypes, right? Because there's the stereotype of like the very competent mother who manages 6 kids and a husband who's often acting like a 7th child, and handles all that without getting emotional. But then there's also the stereotype of like the emotional woman. So it's kind of hard to define the stereotypical woman because there's so many. I mean, when you're dealing with half the population, there's going to be a lot of archetypes people fit into, right?
I actually wanted to just touch lightly on the subject of what you mentioned about having the option to express your emotions and how that there's a corollary to dating, in which a lot of women I know they want a man who's going to come up to them, make the first move, as it's called. And but back in the day, women used to drop their handkerchief, right, and they would walk away, and a man would see this and say, "Oh, well, I'm able to talk to her because I have a reason to do so." And so, right, exactly. And so in this way, but it's still, we have this thing, well, men should make the first move, and he's not a man if he doesn't come up to me first. And it's like, well, as a woman, are you giving him the option to do so? Are you giving him some sort of signal saying hello? I'm not sure what it would be, but
I just mean, like, if without that signal, most guys are gonna just face hundreds, if not thousands, of rejections in their life, and it takes emotional energy to put yourself on that line, right? I mean, unless you're, you can work on that and make it not matter to you, but it's still kind of, each rejection is like an evaluation of who you are, and that can add up. It's something to be aware of, right? And but yeah, with the whole making the first move, like the whole dating culture is a little bit backwards now because we've, one of the interesting things chemically is the birth control pill, right? Because it tricks a woman's body into thinking she's pregnant, her sexual desires change, right? She's looking more for a man who will be a provider for her child, or because she doesn't have a child, but for the child her body thinks she has, right? So we're it's a little bit weird. Like, we want men to make the first move, but we also want them to be sensitive, and it's kind of an over-constrained problem, right? You have to be a real Renaissance man to do all this, and also know when to be which type of man, right? Like, you don't get a guide. There ain't no, blinking light, be assertive now. You don't get that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's tough to get those signals and then to act on them appropriately, and yet, a woman just kind of has to sit there and look pretty. I mean, that might be a narrow view of it, but that's sometimes how I see it. It's just like, well, you don't have to do very much. I have to, or it's assumed that I have to do quite a bit more.
Yeah. That's the thing, is that, I think some women take it for granted that simply by existing and being a woman, there's a large portion of guys who, will find you attractive. I mean, you can make biological evolutionary arguments for why this might be the case, but it's still pretty true that if you're just you get, like, the level of attention that an average girl gets is about equal to the level of attention that a fairly attractive model like guy would get. It's this, and that's not to say that there aren't women who have troubles with that. It's just kind of it's one of those average things that, like, it's a bit easier for women to get attention, I think, and that's
So just is there any kind of types of topics or things that men, you might say, ought to meditate on more that include, like, their emotions and the emotions of others and society?
Good question.
Not sure.
I was thinking that, one thing that I think it would be worthwhile for every guy to spend, like, an hour at some point thinking, it was just like, how do you define your masculinity? Like, I mean, I realized at one point, I think at 17, that I'd never really thought about what it meant to be a guy. And I was like, I just woke up every morning as a guy. People treated me as a guy, and I was fine with that. But, how you define it can give you a powerful sense of, like, a code, an ethos to follow, right? And I think that can be useful. So just spending a bit of time thinking about, what does being a man mean to you? Are these things you want to be, right? If your concept of a man is like a brute that has no emotions, well, then I think it would be easier to redefine what you think of as a man, right? Like, someone who, takes charge when they can and handles things effectively. That can be a definition of manhood. Someone who's sensitive and takes care of their children, that's another definition of manhood. You can define it the way you want and make that a positive thing. I think that would be a good thing to meditate on. Yeah,
absolutely. Do you have any?
I don't know. I'll just take it, like, I guess the thing that came to mind is like this is particularly for young men, but I mean the drive to have sex when you're young is just so strong, and and I think like I don't know if there's something that young men could do or just to kind of think about. I mean, I think really there just needs to be guidance, but that sexual drive can run you off a cliff. It can get you to do some pretty dangerous things and get you into relationships that are not healthy in a lot of ways. And you know, that was certainly the case for me. There are a lot of relationships I got into, and it was almost purely linked to just the desire for sex, or at least that's what actually initiated the relationship. And you know, it's like the smoke clears, and you're wondering, how did you get with this person in the first place? So, I think something that is something important for all men to think about. It's a real challenge.
I'll just say my last bit on what I think men ought to meditate a little bit on is what their examples have been of both male or masculinity and femininity. You know, yeah, like what were your parents like? Well, what do you want to take from their models? What was exemplary? What was less exemplary? What would you really like to integrate into your personality and take forward and maybe hand on to your kids later on? So I've definitely done that, and there was a lot of good things and a lot of bad. So.
I think it's definitely useful at some point. I mean, this is kind of an unrelated topic, but to soberly look at your parents as people at some point, get rid of all that, the ideology of like if they were dictatorial, that's not a word, is it? Dictatorial, you got to let that go at some point and actually look at them as people, warts and all, right? And, whatever respect and awe you have for them, I think it's important at some point to just look at them as another person, regardless of your relationship, and evaluate them honestly, to better inform yourself how to improve, what you can do better, what you can do like them, and that doesn't mean that you can't like turn the respect back on after that. But I think it's important if they've been built up to just be, you do what dad says. Well, what if dad can be wrong, right? And times change too. That's another thing that I mean they could have been completely right about everything when they were growing up, and they carried that forward. But it's things change so rapidly.
It's 2016.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true though, right? That's true. But yeah, I think that's kind of off topic. But I think it's important for everyone to do, men and women. Just if you're going to be a parent, like it's an important job, and it's one that we get. There's no standardized training for that. You pretty much
parenting license.
Yeah, no. You just you try not to let the mistakes pile up, right? Everyone does their best, but
So within the men's rights movement, I guess it's in the title, but there's obviously a lot of men, and I don't know how many, like what the ratio is from men to women, but I know here in Vancouver we have the great honor of having a trans woman, Theron, be kind of one of our leaders there in that way. But what would you say to the women out there, the majority or the minority, I'm not sure what they are, but who would be vocal in saying, this is just, I guess, like male posturing to try and like make their position in society even higher?
We're sitting here talking about our emotions. We're sitting here talking about our problems. We're just doing it on our terms, right? So it's the same end goal. We just, differ on the means a bit, I think, sometimes. We're not in a circle singing Kumbaya, praising the mother goddess or something. But, to the myth of, I'm not making fun of the mythopoetic men. They do their thing. That's great. But I think it's important to allow people to proceed in their own way. So, to the women who would say that we're posturing, well, I mean, I don't know, Jeridan just got done doing a keg stand, so maybe, right? And we're going on a panty raid in a few minutes, but, fuck. We're approaching these issues, and that's what's been asked of us. Just because we don't do it under the label that they like, I mean, that's such a silly thing. I don't know, that it's like preferring Coke over Pepsi. I mean, they're essentially the same thing. I mean, you can have a preference, but don't hate people who like Pepsi. I mean, I know they're wrong between you and me, but they're people too.
Because I know that there's going to be people out there who look at this, even a conversation as, say passive and benign as this that we're having. We're not really going right. Yeah, we're not being violent towards anybody. We're not denigrating any women out there. I certainly don't think so. But there's going to be people who I assume are going to look at this and say, this is the face of men's rights, and this is somehow like it's going to be a negative towards women for them to look at this.
I think it comes down to the difference between saying that men have issues and men are issues. I think that's kind of a yeah. Like I think some people just view men as kind of broken things that need like Data from Star Trek. They need an emotion chip or something, some fix to make them a whole man. But I think if you treat men like a problem and not as a person with problems, you're really, it's dehumanizing, right? It's not gonna really make them want to improve or anything. It's just, if you feel that like you are naturally bad or that there's something naturally wrong with you, then geez, I mean, that's just awful. I can't imagine something more depressing than that. Just
that sucks.
yeah. So I think that it's kind of, you can be mad at men, if there are men that have hurt you, then psychologically that makes sense. I'm not going to just jump in and say not all men, because people have various traumas, right? It's the same with, like, there are some MGTOWs who don't like women. They've had traumas. That's fine. As do what you will, right? But it's if you can, from a mental health perspective, if you look at men as beings with issues, then the healing path is way more readily obvious on how to do that, right? What do you do with a something that has a flawed component? You fix the component. What do you do with something that's broken? You throw it away.
So what is our responsibility then as men, as a collective gender, to other men, to other women? What do you say?
Oh boy, our responsibility as men. I think it's to talk about these issues. I think it's to engage with people. Because a big part of why I'm involved in this too is I'm just thinking about the next generation, like boys, and how I think a lot of these issues affect them. So I think trying to be mindful of a lot of things Jesse just said. Just don't view men as sort of like villains in any way. That's the first thing that popped to mind.
What was the question again?
Oh, just what do we as men have as responsibilities towards other men, other women?
I know. I mean, as much as it might be an awkward thing, when you're alone with your male friends, check up on their mental health. See if they're doing okay. It might be uncomfortable. It might be a little bit beyond the emotional level of your friendship. But I can guarantee you that awkwardness is worth not finding out that they killed themselves. It really is. And I think it's something that we can all do pretty easily. Just check up on each other.
Just on that, I've definitely had it where my friends and I were all very, friendly and buddy together. A lot of camaraderie going on, and it's all very kind of surface level. But that kind of quiet time when we just kind of we're able to get onto a deeper level. That it doesn't happen as often. When it does, it's incredibly rewarding. The more you share with your friend, it's sort of an indication that your friendship has deepened in a way. And I really enjoy when a man or anybody really opens up and they're able to show more of themselves. It displays complexity. It displays sensitivity to others, and just a really great social experience to have. So I mean, if just to incentivize it a little more, talk to your male friends. Yeah.
Deep platonic relationships are not solely the realm of women, right? And I think sometimes we see that, like they're really close female friends. Another thing that's an interesting thing is a platonic touch, right? There are men who don't get touched at all in their life, right? And I know this is true in romantic relationships. Is skin contact releases oxytocin. I don't know if it's true in platonic ones, but I think that's one of the things, is that there's still kind of a lingering, I guess, homophobia of touching your male friends. I mean, like, that's the only reason I can think of that it would still exist as a thing. But I mean, look at how guys act when they get drunk, right? Arms around each other. Fucking love you, man. You're the best. If I were gay, I'd marry you, man. And I think that's one of the reasons guys that inhibition loss it's not just for being able to ask girls out. It's also for being able to open up to people. And I've definitely seen guys use alcohol as a way to do that.
It's sad that it sometimes does come down to it, but I'm glad that it happens on some level, but it can totally happen on a sober level as well.
Yeah. I see people use alcohol because then it's not real, right? Like they didn't actually get emotional; they were just drunk, but they still kind of get that, they get that hit of friendship, right? Sweet, sweet friendship. Got to toke up, right?
Well, that's it for men's rights, I think. Yeah, I think we covered all the bases.
We've ended the conversation. It's done.
Yeah,
The last
clearly
video that needs
finished.
to be, posed, right? Answered all questions here. Well, hopefully this new format works well. It's kind of stream of consciousness conversation. But yeah, from me and all of us here at SFUAMB, thanks for watching, and keep fighting the good fight. If you have any questions, let me know, or any suggestions on what kind of content you want to see. Just post a comment. Hey, have a good one.